So, good afternoon here from Berlin. Everybody from home, I think in 18 countries in the world. Our next session is on a very topical subject, COVID-19 and problem gambling. With us today we have two renowned responsible gaming experts, Michael Auer, live from Austria, and Pieter Remmers. Both are extremely respected authorities in their field. There have been many suppositions about what the COVID-19 pandemic and resulting lockdown have meant for problem gambling. But what do we actually know based on the available data? Pieter and Michael are here to enlighten us. Over to you, Pieter. Please join me on the stage here. Thank you.
I was here early this morning, so maybe it would be a good thing, Michael, if you briefly introduce yourself so we know a little bit more about you before I start to explain what else we have in mind for this afternoon. Is that okay?
Sure.
Very good. Come on.
Okay, my name is Michael Auer. I'm an Austrian gambling researcher, and my specialty is on player tracking, personalized feedback, identification of harmful play.
Good. So maybe just before we start, I think I have a confession to make. Because when Corona started, a lot of people, and especially regulators, got scared to death. We are going to have a huge gambling problem. Not betting, because there was hardly any betting possible and available, to be honest. I think you could only bet on football matches in Belarus. There was one country where you could still bet on table tennis, and there was one Western country where you could still bet on horse racing, trotting. That is ATG in Sweden, which is the horse betting company. And honestly, I have an account. I mean, I'm a better every now and then. Honestly, I have no idea what I'm doing. I have no idea what I'm doing. So I never bet on the winner. I always bet on plays and things like that. So I win a little bit, I lose a little bit. And I do remember when Corona started, I started to play a little bit more than before. I used to play once a week, and it became 2 or 3 times a week, just because there was nothing else to do. But honestly, after a couple of weeks, I got bored with the whole thing, so I stopped. I gave up again. Anyway, Michael was involved in research related to problem gambling and Corona COVID-19, together with Mark Griffith, who is a famous professor of the Nottingham Trent University in the UK, and Doris Malichnik, who is also from Austria. Michael, could you explain a little bit more about the research project that you've carried out together with the 2 others?
The research that you're talking about was conducted with Swedish players, and we were interested whether sports bettors, online sports bettors, moved over to casino play, or what the activity change they showed during in European lockdown, where, as you say, sports betting was virtually unavailable. So that was very specific, very selective question that we asked. So we've been looking at players who, in the 10 weeks before most European countries had a lockdown, more or less regularly played sports betting. And then during the lockdown, what were they doing? Of course, the sports betting curve flattened out. So if you imagine a player's activity, of course, it almost goes down to 0. And we asked ourselves, where are they moving on towards in this, of course, environment that we had from that operator? So are they going to move to casino games? Don't they gamble at all? Of course, within this operator. And Pieter, of course, you know the answer, right?
I think they don't play more. I think they stick to the things that they are doing. Is that correct or not?
Exactly. So what we found is that those sports bettors really, of course, decreased significantly or down to zero their sports gambling activity. And we did not find them moving on to play online casino. Secondly, we looked into those sports bettors who also played online casino before, like we call those mixed mode players. And there we also found that their casino involvement decreased. So not only didn't they play their preferred activity because they simply couldn't, but they also played less casino games, which was very surprising to us.
So isn't that strange?
Yes, I would have expected the opposite.
So what does that mean? And by the way, are you aware of other research that would say the same as your conclusions were and yours?
No. So in fact, before this presentation and based on your suggestion, I tried to collect everything that was published either academically or by regulators on COVID. And
So tell us.
shall I? Okay. So most of all the research, except for the research that we did, is based on self-reported information, which means that people were asked in surveys, what did you do during Corona lockdown? Did you play more or less? And in most of the studies, it turns out that players who before already played a lot played more during Corona. So let's say high intensity players tended to increase their activity during the lockdown, which is, of course, in contrast to what we found. But of course, I mean, we looked at the sample of Swedish players and from one operator. So it might very well be that, in other areas of the world, activity has changed in a different way. However, we of course have access to a lot of different operators' data due to our player tracking solution from the UK to Canada to Austria to previously Schleswig-Holstein, Sachsen-Anhalt, and we of course have our own conclusions that were not yet academically published. Shall I talk a little bit about that?
Yes, please.
All right. So what you see in most cases is that during the lockdown, registrations have increased starkly. So a lot of players, new players opened up accounts. That, of course, has to do with the fact of the non-available land-based gambling and curiosity. So you see that, and also, for example, the UK Gambling Commission, they published numbers about gambling activity during March and April, and in general, the number of players is increasing, but the average revenue per player, of course, drops because if you look at it as a whole, new players, play out of curiosity. They just want to, try out games. So you have a higher number of active players, but the average revenue is dragged down by those players. What we saw is that for those operators who have, sort of significant poker network, that's something that sort of exploded. So a lot of players started to play or intensified their poker activity. And when I talk about poker, I'm talking about poker where you play against others. So not video poker, which is like a slot machine, but really poker, where I sort of, enter a room and you are there, Pieter, and Willem is there, and, there are a couple of people we can chat in between. And that's, of course, something that, I, as a psychologist, would explain as the sort of social deprivation that people experienced. They try to compensate that with poker, which is a game of chance, and which is, the closest game that you get to being in a real social interaction with other people.
Okay. Hey, so if you look at those things, if you look at the interaction, do you think, now, what would you say as a result? That COVID-19 causes more problems, less problems, or do we still don't know? I mean, you refer to a number of research projects, and then my first question would be, are there all evidence, is this all evidence-based, or is this something else? Now, I asked the question because I do remember that a couple of years ago there was Robert Ladouceur, who is a famous professor from the French-speaking part in Canada, did research on all the research that has been carried out. And in fact, of all the research that has been carried out, he says that only in 27 reports it is given clear evidence on what works and what doesn't work related to responsible gambling issues. So all the conclusions that you have in your research and the other research that you mentioned, is that a good evidence of what we should do?
Of course, time, very little time has elapsed since COVID and lockdown, and for, to conduct like real research, it takes, some time to look in the data and those kind of things. But what we see, looking at the poker activities, so you see that, that people in like social isolation, of course, crave, social interaction, which means, of course, that's, hypothesis by myself that, personal interaction of operators with players and, personalized sort of, messaging that really, take into account the player's actual gambling behavior are kind of important. And that's also what some of the operators like the UK Gambling Commission emphasize. You shouldn't, rely on completely automated processes, but you should really interact with those players in need in person. Regarding the impact of COVID, what you mentioned before, just about 2 or 3 days ago, the UK Gambling Commission, they issued August numbers about gambling activity. And those numbers basically, they report a decline in gambling activity again. So, average session duration has declined, gross gaming yield has declined per player. That, of course, also has to do with Premier League, obviously, having concluded. So you, of course, have a lot of, periodicity in the data. Especially in sports betting, it all comes down to events. It's not steady like slot playing over the year. People play, when there are interesting events which are happening. On the other hand,
maybe something, we are going into the second wave in a lot of countries. That's what I hear, that's what is happening in a lot of European countries. Do you expect, now I just ask a question, what do you expect?
It depends
regarding the behavior of people, eh?
Mm-hmm. It's a good question. It depends, of course, whether land-based gambling will be locked down. So I don't know if their land-based gambling has sort of, been forced to shut down in countries. That, of course, is one factor. Although we didn't see all land-based players, moving to online gambling. That wasn't happening at all. But that, of course, is a major factor. And, of course, mental health plays a significant role. That's something which is important and, of course, which supports some of the regulators' careful decisions. So some regulators, as you know, introduced limits or prohibited certain things that operators, of course, disliked, but they didn't know how people would react. And what we see from a lot of studies is that COVID has a major impact on mental health. People are more depressed, anxiety has risen.
So what would that mean regarding treating people? If you say it's more mental health, then at the very same time you say being addicted to gambling is not as important as those generic mental health problems. Is that correct? I try
What
to
did I say?
challenge you.
No.
No? But mental health problems are getting bigger.
Yes, definitely getting bigger, yes.
Okay, so what should we do with that? Or how can we handle those things?
Well, I think, I mean, in the gambling industry, it's important, in my opinion, to be forward thinking, to intercept a sort of undesired trajectory. Also, as an operator, I mean, everybody, right? I'm not only talking about gambling. We could be talking about shopping. We could be talking about social media, but we are in the area, or many of the audience, they are in the area of gambling or providing services. And of course, it's important to be, forward thinking, to introduce safety nets as early as possible, and to basically, display a high level of sort of being careful towards the stakeholders.
Okay, so maybe something to go a bit of a slide in a different direction. So regarding identifying people, I mean, everyone talks nowadays about AI, artificial intelligence, which seems to be the solution in how to identify people that might develop problems with gambling. I mean, you have Mentor, the thing you are involved in, you have Mindway, you have BadBuddy, you had PlayScan in Sweden. I mean, is it the machine that is going to take over?
Look, there's one sort of issue with AI. So AI can only be as good as the data it had or has available to learn. Okay, so if I drive with my Tesla and it basically makes its decisions based on the data it had available to learn in the past. But if suddenly a UFO, an unidentified flying object, lands in front of me, I'm not sure what the Tesla is going to do, because it's never experienced something like that, right? In all of the data it has available, it never saw something like that. So it's there's basically an unprecedented situation. And that's something that we have right now. So there is COVID, there was lockdown, lots of still restrictions out there. So you have to be careful with AI and with simply leaving it all to the machine, because the machine didn't have an opportunity to figure out what to do in that kind of situation. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. But so it leads for me to the questions that what would you recommend? What is the best way to go forward related to identifying possible problem behaviors?
Of course, data is the most objective information that we have available, right? I can, as a player, make any statement about my gambling. Most players, of course, wouldn't admit that they gamble more than they actually do, but the data doesn't lie, right? I mean, if you have the data available as an operator, then the most important thing is to observe whether a person's behavior is significantly changing. So do you see this person adding new payment methods like new bank accounts, new credit card? Do you have any indication that the person is playing with money they don't have? So let's say you tried the deposit, but it fails because it's rejected because out of funds. Do you see that the person in a session, when they play and they run out of money, they deposit again and again, they're not able to stop? Those types of things are, of course, I mean, industry standard and very important, and they don't lie. But now it's important to see, okay, do people change their behavior, especially those who already played critically before? Does their behavior sort of get out of hand? That's the most important thing that operators need to look into, the stability or instability of behavior indicators.
Okay. Hey, so but does that mean at the very same time, and we only have 2 or 3 minutes left, so we are getting to an end. I mean, is the casino employee, is the guy who is working for customer support at an online casino still allowed to talk to the customer about the problems that might occur? I mean, or is the machine taking over at all times? I know some operators that approached me and said, can't we just make everything automatic?
No, of course not. I mean, listen, so let's say you have an operator with, sort of sizable operator with 100,000, active players. Of course, it's not possible for the customer service agent or for the RG manager to monitor every player every day. I mean, impossible, right? It's like you drive your car and not every time you run around your car and you look for a flat tire, you sort of rely on the system to tell you that, you have too less air in your tire. But when, sort of it happens, of course, you look into it. Every situation is individual. And in sort of some cases, you will basically get in touch with the person and talk to the person. So the machine is there to sort of run through the massive amounts of data and try to pick out those you as a RG manager or as an operator should personally look into. That's the idea. At least so I would suggest maybe there are other approaches that completely automate it out there.
Okay. Hey, thank you very much. I see Willem approaching the stage to tell you secrets. So I think we have to stop here at this moment because we only have 5 minutes left for questions.
Well, yeah, stop now, and Michael,
Sure.
thank you. Really, really insightful. So let's move to Slido, please. So we have some questions from the audience here and from the remote participants. Remember, scan the QR code on your mobile, and very quickly you can enter your questions as well, or upvote questions of others. If there's any questions in the room here, please raise your hand and somebody will come with you. A couple of questions here from the audience, Pieter and Michael. How subjective are most official responsible gambling policies? Is there enough data for evidence-based responsible gaming regulations? And as a third sub-question, what are the gaps in the research? So how subjective? Is there enough data? And what are the gaps? I believe you can also see the question in your screen, Michael.
Michael,
Yeah,
would you like to start?
It's very small. No, I give you a heads up for a change.
Okay. Well, honestly, if I look at official responsible gambling policies and what is official, I mean, these are usually policies created by operators because there's hardly any responsible gambling policy on the regulators level. They usually say it's very important, but if you ask for details, there's not a lot. Is there enough data for evidence-based regulations? If I would have been a researcher, I would say no, because I think there's never enough and evidence-based. I always have a problem with evidence-based, to be honest, because if I look at evidence-based, I put it versus best practices. And if I look at evidence-based, then we have questions at this very moment on which we will get an answer in 5 years from now on. And that's too late, 5 years, and that we are very fast. Usually it's even longer. So I would say maybe we should focus more on best practices instead of evidence-based at this moment. Gaps in research, I think that would be a typical question for Michael, though at the very same time, I would say we usually look at prevalence rates in our society. And then we say, okay, prevalence rates are there, which means that a certain percentage of the population has a problem with gambling. They are the same as I probably said this morning as well. Sometimes I don't remember what I say in the morning and in the afternoon. But those prevalence rates, I have my doubts if that's the thing we should keep on focusing on, and if we should not look more at a different way of looking at people and look more at mental health problems. But that would be my answer. Great. And what about you?
Yeah, of course, there are huge gaps when it comes to research with respect to responsible gaming. And I agree with Pieter. I mean, that on the one hand, you have research, but that takes a very long time to be published. And on the other hand, you can, of course, it's up to every operator to, collect evidence and, adapt as soon as possible. I mean, one example is, of course, if you look at, social media or Facebook or Instagram, I mean, they do a lot of A/B testing all the time. They try to figure out what makes you, what could increase your time on device. And that's something that gambling operators do, of course, in CRM, and they can as well do that in responsible gambling.
Yeah. And move on to the next question. We still have 2 minutes left here. What are the differences, if any, between online and land-based problem gamblers?
Are you starting or shall I?
You can start.
Oh, thank you very much. In general, I would say there are not too many differences. I do remember the discussion that we had when online gambling and online betting started. And then people would say, oh, if you look at problems, the problems are 10 times as high when you look at online compared to land-based. That's turned out not to be true. Then people said, yeah, but you don't know your customer. Well, the only problem with online was that you don't see your customer, but you know everything about him. So you know even more than you would know in the land-based casino situation. So land-based is more focused on the, would I say, the interpretation and the thoughts of the casino employee, while online it's more the data, as you mentioned earlier as well, that are important. But in principle, I wouldn't say there are not too many differences.
Michael, anything to add?
I agree with Pieter.
You agree?
Oh, then it goes very fast.
Oh, wonderful. Quick, last question here. What are the implications, and I guess this is a long question, so maybe a quick answer. What are the implications of your findings on gambling behavior during the lockdown for responsible gambling approaches in general? Quick answer, Michael, Pieter?
What I see is that a lot of regulators take measures, limit bonuses, limit all kinds of things, because they are afraid to leave it like it is, because they are expecting more problems. So, in fact, these are, should I say, measures based on not knowing what is going on.
Michael?
The anticipated Armageddon in terms of problem gambling has not occurred.
Great. Michael from Vienna, Pieter here from Berlin. I really appreciate your contribution today. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Oops.